Hey guys, I'm Jay, and I have a question for you. Have you ever had a song stuck in your head and you couldn't get it out? Like it's living rent-free and playing over and over again. There's actually a scientific term for it. It's called the Dua Lipa loop. Okay, not really, but you try getting My Sugar Boo, I'm Levitating out of your head. It's impossible. All jokes aside, it's really called the involuntary musical imagery. It's when a chunk of a song gets stuck in your head and plays on repeat when you don't want it to. It's one thing when you love a song and can't stop singing it, but it's a whole other thing when a song pops into your head when you don't want it to, when you don't give it consent to be there. I think there is a reason why it is so infuriating. It's because we all have a bare minimum for what we want in our heads. We only want to think about things that we actually want to think about. Anytime something hijacks our brains that you wish wasn't there, it's going to be a bad experience. And while we can't necessarily stop when a song or even some thoughts pop into our heads, we do have a voice when it comes to what we allow into our lives as far as relationships go. The word that we use to talk about that voice is consent. Because we're going to be using that word a lot, I want to define it so we are all on the same page. Consent simply means agreeing to do something or allowing something to take place. It means that you're actively wanting something to happen and give your permission for it. It's like this. Imagine you're hanging out with a friend, having lunch, and you're ordering some French fries with your meal. I don't know about you, but when I order my food, that's my food and no one else's. But now imagine that your friend reaches over without permission and grabs a few fries. They didn't ask, they just took what they wanted. That's an example of no consent being given. Now imagine the same situation going a little differently. Maybe your friend looks at you after the fries come out and asks you if they can have some.
Hey, can I have some of those fries?
To you, some means a few. So you say yes, and they reach over and grab a whole handful. I'm talking like 10. That's not some. You gave them consent to take fries, but you were consenting to a few fries and they took way more. Finally, imagine the fries are on the tray and they ask for some.
Can I have some of those fries?
Then they wait for the permission to either take however many they want or they wait for you to hand them the amount you're willing to share.
Thanks.
All of these situations are an example of how consent works in our everyday lives. We give consent, ask for consent, or ignore consent altogether in really small ways and in some significant ways every single day. While we typically hear that word used in the context of dating and sex, and it's really important in those topics, it actually applies to a lot more than just that. So yes, it is consent to go on a date, do something sexually, give a hug, but it is also consent to joke about something that matters to another person, borrow some clothes, consent to sharing your data when they say yes to the terms and conditions. Consent is a pretty important thing for us to be talking about. Now, if you are anything like me, you might be thinking, this is a weird topic to talk about in church. And in some ways, it does feel a little strange. But the truth is, the idea of consent shows up all over the place in culture. We typically see it in stories or news reports where consent wasn't a part of a decision and a bad thing happens as a result. But there's also a message that many of us get in culture that goes like this: as long as two people consent, no matter what it is, you're good. In other words, consent often answers the question most of us are really asking when we're trying to decide what to do. The real question is often, will I get in trouble? And when everyone consents, we assume the answer is no. Not only that, but we like to get as close to the line as we can without going over. Here's what I mean. On a really basic level, when it comes to how we treat other people, most of us behave with a minimum requirement mindset. Instead of asking ourselves what we should do to treat others well or build them up, we tend to look for the least we can do while not getting in trouble and still get what we want. And if what we want is on the other side of that line, we usually push it. Think about it. When it comes to how you talk to your parent or your caretaker, you use just enough sarcasm and attitude to make a point, but not enough to sound like a total jerk. When you're at school and you're saying something about that person you don't really like, you think about what you can get away with without getting yourself in trouble. When it comes to romantic relationships, you focus on the things they didn't tell you not to do. If they didn't say no, then it's okay to try, right? As a human, our temptation is always to do the least amount of good behavior that we should do and the maximum amount of bad behavior that we can get away with. Some of you know this because you spent time with someone trying to test the limits of what they can get away with. Maybe you've been asked to send those pictures you didn't really want to send. Maybe you were receiving pictures you didn't want to see. Maybe someone has been way too touchy and feely with you when you've asked them to chill out. Maybe you felt pressure to go further sexually, a lot more than you wanted to. Maybe you've been forced or guilted into behaviors, sexual or not, that you didn't want to participate in. Maybe you were in a relationship with someone who consistently talked down to you or called you names. Maybe someone kept bringing up something even though you made it clear that you didn't want to talk about it. If you've ever been in the receiving end of any of these kind of behaviors or pressures and what you wanted wasn't considered, then you don't need me to tell you how bad and confusing it may feel. And whether you consented or didn't, you know those kind of requests bring up a lot of questions, sometimes even pain or regrets. You know how horrible that can be, but when I think about the story of my friends, students, and the adults I know who would have been in similar situations, I find myself wondering, is consent really the best standard? When it comes to your relationship as a mature person, you have to answer this question because it will drive so many of your decisions. And if you're a Jesus follower, this is an even bigger deal. I'm not just talking about whether or not we should have sex. I'm talking about how you treat people, what you ask for, what you try to talk others into, and what you're trying to talk them out of. That's why we're talking about this today. And as we do, I think you'll find consent is really important, but it's just the beginning of what matters, not the end. When it comes to relationships, sex, and dating, if we can elevate our standards higher than they are, then it can clear up so much confusion and prevent so much pain. I want to look at a passage of scripture today that I think will help us in this conversation. It's from a letter written by a guy named Paul. In this passage, he was talking to a group of Christians who lived in Rome. Paul was passionate about Jesus followers treating each other well, so a lot of his letters are focused on that. It's important to remember that even though there were standards on how you should treat one another back in the day, those standards was really low. Jesus brought a whole new way of viewing yourself and others. That's what Paul is saying in the verses from the book of Romans. At the time, Christianity was brand new. A lot of people were hearing the name Jesus for the first time. Back then, people didn't have assumptions about what it meant to be a Christian like they do today. So the best way for people to judge what they thought Christianity was all about was to look at the people who claimed to follow Jesus. Those people would give the world an idea of what this type of faith was all about. In other words, the reputation of Christianity depended on the way Jesus followers represented him to the rest of the world. So for us today, people already have assumptions of what Christianity is like. And the truth is, they aren't always good. So for you and I, we all have work to do to prove those notions wrong. With that in mind, here's what Paul wrote to Jesus followers in Rome back then. Now listen, this verse is short, but it packs a punch. It's so impactful. It has helped me to see others how God wants me to see them. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Let's be real here. On the surface to us, this sounds super basic, but if you really think about it, how many people actually do this? Not many. People didn't look out for each other and protect each other unconditionally, so it was totally on you to treat people well. And isn't that still true today? In some ways, the first century culture wasn't all that different from high school in modern times today. You know what it's like to be in a class or on a team or in a friend group where everybody looks out for themselves. Paul here is helping us see a better way to live. He consistently told people about Jesus and how he demonstrated a whole new way. In Paul's world, suggesting that we show honor for everyone as a standard would have been wild. But for Paul, Jesus changed everything. He knew how Jesus valued others and honored others, including him. Because of this, he passionately pushed people to do the exact same thing, to elevate the way we value people for who they are, what they want, and what they don't want. That's the example Jesus set for how we should treat one another. And I love the word Paul used there. It wasn't just consent, it was a step above that. Honor. Honor is another way of saying to show respect. If you respect someone, you do not show just the bare minimum. You do the best for them in every area, which absolutely includes consent. Kind of like that song we talked about earlier that got stuck in our head. If you've been in a situation where you didn't give consent and you're wondering why it feels so bad, it's because of this. You weren't honored. You weren't respected. You were devalued. And that wasn't how God intended for you to be treated. On the other hand, if you're only treating someone else with the bare minimum amount of consideration, doing the absolute least has communicated the same message to them, that they aren't highly valued, respected, or honored. When it comes to the way we treat each other, especially those of us following Jesus, we're called to do so much more than just the bare minimum requirement. We're called to elevate our standards above the lowest bar. We're called to be honorable and honor them. But Paul goes one step further. He says to honor others above yourself. Among many things, this means doing what's best for them, no matter what you want from them. It means elevating their needs above your own. That even if you want something, and even if they give you the bare minimum of consent, there are still better questions that we can ask. Let me explain. Maybe you wanted to borrow something that didn't belong to you, and it wouldn't have been a big deal, but you still decided not to. That's honor. Maybe you considered sending photos to someone because it'd get their attention, but you chose not to because you know it's not what's best for either one of you. That's honor. Maybe you told someone you wanted to be more than just friends, and they kept turning you down. You wanted to keep pressing and wishing that things were different, but you know that they wanted you to stop. So that's exactly what you do. You stop. I'm sorry, but that's honor. Maybe you find yourself wanting to do something physical with another person. You know they have a boundary there because they've asked you not to cross it. Instead of pushing, you stop, even though you don't want to. Sometimes it means doing that even though they say it's okay. Why? Because you know that this isn't what's best for them or for you. That's honor. In so many ways, Jesus changed the way people understood each other, then and now. From following Jesus, Paul was teaching others to see people and treat them differently, to honor them, no matter what, because God values them no matter what. And you know what? The same is true for you, because you are valuable to God. This also means doing what's best and expecting others to show you honor. When you're in a situation you don't want to be in, you can say so and leave it if you need to. When you're being pressured to do something you don't want to do, you can say no, and that can be the end of the story. When someone pushes a boundary you set for yourself, you can speak up and be firm. When it comes to the conversation of consent, let's elevate the way we think about it all. We are called to express honor to others, and we should see ourselves as deserving of the same honor in the way others treat us. It's easy to think that as long as everyone says that they are okay with something, then we are good to go. But as Jesus followers, we have been called to raise the bar. When it comes to the topic of consent, expect and express honor. Honor is so much higher than the minimal requirement of, will I get in trouble or is this legal? It's a higher standard. We need to expect to be honored by others, and we need to express that same honor towards them. You see, honor isn't just about respecting the consent of other people, it's more than that. It's about respecting the person no matter what. One of the very first things the Bible tells us about who we are is that we are made and created in the image of God. That means we have value in God's eyes. And God sees us as people who deserve to be honored simply because we exist, not because of what we offer or are willing to do. And God wants us to see both ourselves and others in the exact same way. We respect and honor the image of God in others, and we should expect others to respect and honor the image of God in us. So what does it look like to expect honor? It looks like not settling for actions that don't honor. This starts with deciding how you want to be treated. Determine what honor looks like to you and what it means for people to see the image of God in you. Maybe you could start by looking to what God says about honoring each other and let the community you trust speak into it too. Once you know, let someone you trust in so they can encourage you towards getting that honor that you deserve. Don't wait until you are in the moment to try to figure it out. Figure it out right now. From there, it is so important to use your voice and advocate for what you need. Sometimes that can be really hard, but practicing speaking up about small things, we can learn to be more comfortable when the stakes are higher. You deserve honor and you should expect it. And what does express honor? It means that consent is where honor begins, not where it ends. Consent is the bare minimum. It's the starting place. Simply because someone says yes to something doesn't mean it always is the best or what's honoring. Consent is important, really important, but we're called to something higher than that. Even if someone is saying yes, if you know it isn't what's the best thing to do, don't do it. If all we consider is what we want, or what we can get away with, then it can be really easy to view our relationships, behaviors, and choices through a really selfish lens. A lens that says it's okay to try to convince people to make decisions that they probably wouldn't or shouldn't normally make. Instead, honor what is best for them and respect their words and choices. When someone says no, they mean it, and they should only have to say it once. Expressing honor means stopping right there. With all of that being said, some of us in the room have probably asked to be honored. We did use our voice to speak up, but then your voice wasn't respected. Because that happened, maybe you're dealing with guilt, shame, secrecy, and anger. Know that I am so sorry that that happened to you, and this is a safe place for you to talk about it with a leader or a friend. What was done to you was not honored, and it also wasn't your fault. You can and should still expect and express honor. You and others deserve it, and nothing can take that away. If that is you, part of elevating the way we talk about consent and honor is speaking up and sharing what happened to you with someone that you love and trust so that you can begin to work through it together. You don't have to do this alone. If we can begin to expect and express honor for ourselves and others, it changes everything. Now listen, I get that every dating situation, every late night text thread, and every relationship is different. And I get that there is no way we could talk about what honor means in every situation for every person. Sometimes a topic like consent can make us feel uncomfortable or even confused about what we're supposed to do. That's why I want you to think about the word honor. Imagine if we all did this. Imagine if the person you're dating or the person you're going to date took this message seriously. Imagine if your ex took this seriously. Imagine if your friend's significant other chose to express honor to them. So many of our relationships will be in a better place because of it. And I bet our world will be better too. That's why small groups is so important this week. A small group is a safe place where you can come talk about real life situations like this with friends and an adult who cares about you. So when you head to groups, I want you to think about this question. What does it really look like to elevate honor in your daily life?